this Sunday means and what this whole week means. Would your Spirit speak to the ears of our hearts as we're looking at these things that Matthew has written, and they're not just mind things, but they're spiritual truths. Would you continue to speak to us, to shape us and to form us as we continue reading these amazing words of Matthew? Amen. All right. Well, it's time today to get Jesus out of the valley. We've been in the valley with Jesus long enough, and we're going to get him out of the valley. We're going to reach the end of this valley of 10 miracles. Matthew, he's recorded these 10 miracles of Jesus for us, and he's broken them up into 3 sets. We've come to realize that what Matthew is doing is he's using physical moments to tell us spiritual things. And currently, Matthew is telling us what Jesus is bringing. Specifically, what is this new thing of Jesus that cannot be patched onto or poured into the old? Last week, we saw that the new thing is first and foremost life. It's spiritual life. The message of life for our spirits is delivered to us by 2 women. In the healing of the dying woman and a dead girl, we find that Jesus brings life. He's bringing life to the spiritual seekers who are reaching for the tassels, who are reaching for the truth, and they find Jesus. And he's bringing life to the spiritually dead, who for Jesus, these are the people who are simply asleep, because there's no death in Jesus' presence. There's only tired, worn out souls who have exhaustedly fallen asleep. And Jesus will take them by the hand and wake them up. Our next to last miracle is found in Matthew chapter 9, verses 27 through 31. And we have this on a slide. And this Sunday, I'm not going to read through the passage. We'll have the passage up. And I'm going to talk through each verse as we go. In this next miracle, we find our next Matthew-style duplication of people or of things. Our first was when Jesus sailed in the storm across the lake. And on the other side, he encountered 2 demon-possessed people. It was in that encounter in which we considered that Mark and Luke only record one of something, but Matthew is highlighting the work of Jesus by doubling it, because there's 2 parties, Jew and Gentile, that are being addressed in the other 2 Gospels, where one man is freed from the forces of evil, where one man is given sight, and where one donkey carries the presence of Jesus. Matthew has doubles. This doesn't make things untruthful to present things in this manner. I can speak of my singular grandfather as 2 people. I can tell you about the amazing grandfather that I saw, who was full of love and mercy and compassion and softness. And I can also tell you of the grandfather who I knew, who I could see within him at times a hardness, an anger, and other things on that side. And I can speak in one grandfather of 2 people, because there are 2 sides, there are 2 parties at play. So I'm telling you the truth when I speak of 2 grandpas that I could experience from one person. And this is what I see Matthew doing in a singular. He is seeing the truth of what is spiritually happening to two parties. And he wants to draw attention to that because it is Jew and Gentile who need freed from the forces of evil. It is Jew and Gentile who need to gain spiritual sight. And it will be two parties, Jew and Gentile, who will carry the presence of Jesus. We've seen that Matthew has turned these physical miracles into metaphors of spiritual things, and we're considering that he offers these key doubles as metaphors for the spiritual reality that he's trying so hard to get into the mind of his Jewish readers, that the spiritual things of Jesus are for two parties. So we arrive at the two blind men in the Gospel of Matthew. Continuing his work of metaphors from this point forward, Matthew will carry on the metaphor of physical blindness to reflect a lack of spiritual understanding through his gospel, or a lack of spiritual insight, or a lack of spiritual vision. The play of physical blindness to internal blindness was a traditional metaphor throughout the ancient world. In one of Plato's books, he said, even a blind man can see this, because he tried to say, this isn't hard to see, what's wrong with you? The blind were used as an example of someone who was blind internally as well. And obviously, we've learned in Matthew's metaphors that what we're about to read of a physical thing is meant to be seen by us as a spiritual truth. In arriving at the two blind men, Jesus gives us no names. But I often like to give names to the nameless because it draws me into the story better, and sometimes it's just fun. So Matthew introduces us to the blind men of Bart and Brad. And as they're physically blind, Matthew's readers are supposed to assume they are not very smart about spiritual matters. Physical blindness to the ancient reader is automatically going to make them say these are not bright people in internal matters. We left off last week with Jesus at the house of the Jewish leader, where he raises the daughter from the dead. And our literary journey through Matthew has carried us through this valley from Jesus is breaking down the temple barriers that keep us from following God. But following Jesus might not be fun all the time. So be careful. So why do we want to do it? And the first answer last week was, because he brings life to my soul. On this high note, on this amazing first thing, we follow Jesus out of the Jewish leader's house as he's going to walk back to what Matthew consistently calls the house. This is a nameless house out of which Jesus operates while he's in Capernaum. Matthew calls it the house. This is the house where Matthew first reclined with Jesus alongside other sinners. This is the house where the Pharisees' idea of salvation by segregation hits up against Jesus' salvation by association. Let me associate with you and show you who I am and show you how it's done. Many scholars consider that this was probably Jesus' house. And it seems appropriate that it's Jesus' house that he is opening up to the sinners. We'll find that Matthew even uses the house as another metaphor when certain things that he writes of happen in or out of the house. Matthew uses everything in his writing to teach us. So Jesus is walking back to the house. And as soon as he leaves the Jewish leader's house, blind Bart and blind Brad begin to follow him. Given their handicap, we're not meant to expect too much from them. Because again, their physical blindness is meant to indicate to us that there is an internal lack of understanding or ability to understand. But these two men are going to introduce us to some of the deepest spiritual insight we have yet to read in the Gospel of Matthew. They will introduce us to the title to Jesus of Son of David. This title, it will play an important role through the rest of Matthew. They introduce the title as they follow behind Jesus, calling out, "Have mercy on us, Son of David." The term Son of David, it looks for the hoped-for person from the lineage of David who would come as the royal Messiah, the Christ, to reign on an eternal throne. These two blind men are essentially going behind Jesus, following behind him and publicly proclaiming him the Christ. And they are crying for the mercy of the Messiah. And Jesus keeps on walking. We can go to the next verse. Despite being blind, these men are able, as Matthew was when he was called, to follow Jesus through the streets and into Jesus' house. Matthew doesn't explain how this is physically possible, because we're to understand these men followed Jesus without problem because they could see Jesus better than anyone else had up to this point, even though they were blind. Blind Bart and blind Brad are the first ones to see and proclaim Jesus' royalty. The vision of their understanding is clear enough to follow Jesus through the city and into his house as they continue to essentially pray to him for mercy. There's so much richness in this miracle. I love it. And without this miracle, we may forget the lessons of the little faiths and the miracle that was made with no request at all. We may risk into falling into the abuse of the Word of Faith movement and other movements that make miracles hinge on me. As long as my faith is up to par, the miracle should happen now. Miracles recently, they just happened, seemingly instantaneously, for the bleeding woman and the dead daughter. But this story gives balance to our reality. What Matthew gives us in the journey of the blind men of great faith that does not receive a miracle, but it follows Jesus still, despite multiple unanswered prayers. These are not just any old prayers, but these are prayers from a faith more than any other faith we have yet to see in the Gospel of Matthew, that knows Jesus for who he really is. And it is declaring Jesus for who he really is, the Son of David, the hoped-for Messiah. And the Greek word for how they are praying behind Jesus, it's often translated shout or cry in many English Bibles. But the Greek harkens back to shrieking, screaming, even croaking to where you are using your voice so hard that it breaks and cracks. Bart and Brad are praying hard, and they are getting no answer. But they keep following Jesus despite unanswered prayer. There's no problem presented here on their end. There is no problem with their faith. They are shamelessly screaming their prayers through the streets. They receive no answer, but they continue in their great faith to still follow Jesus. These men, I believe they might be the most explicit example of enduring faith in the Gospel of Matthew. They might be the greatest example of faith in Jesus that the Gospels record. When we see Jesus' response to these two, as they finally receive a miracle, we will find that their faith was not the issue. Apparently, Jesus' timing is what was at hand. Because you see, a miracle, number one, might take place. They're not promised. But a miracle might take place. And it might take place when we want it. But it may also hinge on Jesus deciding the time has come. And the lack of a miracle may be due to no part of our own. All through chapter 8 of Matthew, we saw miracles that came to those with no record of faith, in Peter's mother-in-law, those with weak faith, the disciples in the storm, and even those opposed to faith in the contempt of the demoniac. Through chapter 8, we saw that a lack of faith does not cut off Jesus' miracle work. But lest we consider that Jesus is then indifferent to faith, we have Matthew chapter 9. In Matthew chapter 9, faith is highlighted. As theologian Bruner puts it, we see in Matthew chapter 9 that Jesus loves it when people think he can. He loves it. But back at our miracle today, lest we go too far to believe that it is our faith, and somehow we have to work up enough belief that yes, Jesus can, lest we believe it hinges on us, we have the agonizing journey of blind Bart and blind Brad. They scream their prayers at Jesus' backside as they continue to walk out their great faith at 3 miles an hour, walking through the streets. Finally, Jesus arrives at the house. The two blind men follow him in. And Jesus asks if they have faith. Do they believe that he can heal them? And blind Brad says, no. We followed you, screaming our heads off, without really thinking you could do anything. Of course we have faith that you can do something. Of course we believe you can do this. And so we go to the next verse. So now, at Jesus' chosen time and at Jesus' chosen place, he heals them. Light comes flooding into their eyes. Not only does he heal them, but he gives them the response that is only in the Gospel of Matthew reserved for the great faith. Jesus says, according to your faith, let it be done. This is the same response he gave to the centurion. With Jesus' response, he places these two men on the invitation list for the banquet of faith heroes. They will dine alongside Abraham, alongside a Gentile centurion, and alongside another Gentile woman who we have yet to meet. He recognizes their great faith, and he heals them at his place and at his time, after who knows how many unanswered prayers, for how long. But they kept holding on. Upon recognizing their faith and healing them, Jesus warns the men sternly. No one is to know of what's been done here. So we go to the next verse. What we see is that the men run out and they spread the word of Jesus. The word spread here in the Greek, it carries the image of a blazing fire that burns and can't be stopped. It starts to spread like wildfire through the area. We've often seen in Matthew that silence can be a gift. But that's not the case here. Jesus does not tell these men like he told the leper, don't go tell anyone what happened here. Rather, after giving them sight, Jesus says, see to it. We need to stop here. Do you like the play on words? Jesus has brought them physical sight. And now he is telling them to see to something. Matthew expects his readers to then say, I see what you're doing here. Apparently, even Jesus and the ancient culture appreciated dad jokes. That is what this essentially is. It's simple, it's stupid. But Jesus gives them sight. And then he says, now see to it. Jesus says, see to it that no one knows what happened here. This is an impossible command. Two blind people have followed Jesus through the street, proclaiming him, shrieking that he is the Christ, the expected one. They have screamed their unanswered prayers to him. And now, two blind men are going to leave the house, obviously not blind. People are going to know what happened here. Jesus' command is an impossible command. And I believe that one commentary gets it right when it says this: the command is given to be broken. The goal is to highlight or to impress upon the readers that the mighty deeds of Jesus are so extraordinary they cannot be hidden. Jesus' glory shines forth in spite of even his own attempt to conceal it. So this command is meant to be broken in order to highlight us that even Jesus can say, don't let people know who I am, but even Jesus cannot conceal his greatness. Here we have come to the metaphor part of Matthew's miracle, the miracle that Matthew is giving us. The blind men are meant to the ancient readers to reflect those who most lack the ability to understand spiritual things. These are the underdogs of religion. In order for them to understand who Jesus is and be the first to proclaim him the Son of David, they had to have received a gift of spiritual enlightenment, just like the women received the gift of life. Matthew's point is that just as Jesus is the source of illumination that was brought to their physical eyes, Jesus is the source of the spiritual illumination by which the blind men were able to see him and follow him clearly, because these are the people who in and of themselves could not have come up with this. Jesus is the source of supernatural enlightenment, supernatural vision, supernatural understanding, so clear that two blind men could follow him all the way into his house. The lesson of the women was that Jesus is the source of spiritual life. The lesson of the two blind men is that Jesus is the source of spiritual understanding. So we arrive at the last miracle in the valley, miracle number 10. It's recorded in Matthew 9:32-34, and we have this also on the slide. In miracle number 10, a man has lost his voice to the forces of evil. And despite no physical blindness, Matthew wants us to know that this man has to be brought to Jesus. This man has a blindness that cannot see Jesus, even though he can physically see. As we considered last week, that the bleeding woman stands in for all who are spiritually dying, but they can find it within themselves to move and reach out. So too, the blind men stand in as those in need of spiritual illumination, who are still able to go shrieking in prayer after it until they encounter its fullness. But just as the dead daughter from last week is the metaphor for those who cannot, because they have been spiritually crushed and spiritually killed by this world, they cannot reach in and of themselves. They can do nothing for themselves. This mute man is the parallel to the dead daughter. He is the one who is so lost in darkness that he can do not even the most basic action that the blind men could. The group of the spiritually dead are the ones whose tired souls have fallen asleep, too exhausted to reach out for life. The group of the spiritually muted are the ones whose spiritual voices have become so oppressed they cannot cry out. In particular, they cannot cry out to begin a relationship with God. In contrast with the previous men who could scream out their needs to God, the mute man's voice has been silenced. An inability to speak to God is to be unable to have genuine relationship with God. Because genuine relationship rests upon knowing that we are being heard. The forces of evil have so overwhelmed this man that the most basic building block to relationship with God has been removed. He cannot begin relationship in and of himself. The relationship of voice, the relationship of crying out to God, is the most foundational act upon which many humans begin their relationship with God. It is the ability to cry out with the hope that God might hear us in our moment of crisis that begins the relationship with God for many people. with that foundational ability suppressed in this man, he is the stand-in. He is the metaphor for those so lost in darkness that not only can they not see the light and must be brought to it, they cannot see the light even when people place them right in front of it. They are even unable to cry out for the light to help them. These are the people who exist all through our world. These are the people whose spiritual voices have been muted by evil. Sadly, too many of these voices have even been muted by the evil done at the hands of those who claim the God of Jesus. Often after the abuse that victims endure at the hands of people in the church, they can no longer find the words to speak, to cry out to God, to even hope for a relationship. We'll go to the next verse. As we saw that the loving touch of Jesus brings life to those who cannot reach for it themselves, we find that the love of Jesus rescues oppressed people to begin a relationship by having a voice that they can speak with, to be heard by their God. We'll be bringing in the kids in a second here as we close the Miracles in the Valley. With all 10 miracles completed, we can see the entire scope of the deeper spiritual truth that Matthew wants us to see from the metaphors of these miracles. We have the metaphor slide from last week, where group 3 was blank last week. We can now fill it in. In the first group of miracles, they're the metaphor for spiritual access to God being open for all. In the second group of miracles, they are metaphors for the spiritual cost that may come to us for following God. And now the third group of miracles reveals the new thing that Jesus is bringing. It is spiritual life, it is spiritual understanding, and it is spiritual relationship. The thing that Jesus is bringing is life that can come even when hope and time have run out. It is understanding that comes to our heart beyond what even the most limited minds can conceive. And it is relationship that reaches for us in the captivity of darkness and evil to first give us a voice, to begin to pray and believe that our God is hearing us, the most foundational building block of a relationship. And so we go to Matthew 9:33 and 34. The mute man is restored to speak. And the people are amazed. They've never seen anything like this in Israel. And Matthew has designed his writing so that we are meant to identify with the amazed people. We're meant to read this and sit in amazement and identify with them. I'm amazed too. This is amazing. And as we identify with the amazed people, hearing a mute man speak over here with Jesus, we're meant to read the next verse on the next slide and hear the Pharisees from over there as they declare the unconditional love of Jesus to be sourced in evil. Matthew skillfully draws us to identify with the amazed crowd that is caught in the middle of a choice that we face every day that we wake up. Do we pull away and move to the safety of the Pharisees? Or do we choose to be pulled towards our amazing Jesus with his dangerous associations to sinners, to the hurting, and to the rejected? Matthew in his literature makes us experience this, the tension of now two choices presented to us. Pray that we choose Jesus, because he has chosen every one of us. As Nate comes up to close us in worship, we're going to take communion. If you need communion, would you raise your hand and we can get some brought out to you? If you didn't get any communion, we need one over here. And one over here. I love the miracles of Matthew because they teach such deep truths beyond what simply meets your eye, beyond simply what physically happened. It gives us a vision to the deep things of Jesus. So as Nate leads our closing worship, what I invite you to do is sit and consider the choice that we are faced with every day. We sit in the tension of these two voices, these two choices every day. But Jesus has chosen us. And he has set the table for us. And we see that in communion. I've said it in the past, and I'll say it again. I love the one guy who said, other religions, they must set the table for their God and hope their God comes. In Christianity, God has already set the table for us in communion. He has already chosen us. He's already set a place for us. So I invite you to sit in the love of Jesus. That while we face a choice, he's already made a choice for us. And when you're ready, take communion as Nate closes us in worship.
In the crushing, in the pressing, you are making new wine. In the soul I now surrender, you are breaking new ground. So I yield to you into your careful hands. When I trust you, I don't need to understand. So make me a vessel, make me an offering, make me whatever you want me to be. And God, I came here with nothing but all you have given me. Jesus, bring new wine out of me. In the crushing, in the pressing, you are making new wine. In the soil I now surrender, you are breaking new ground. You are breaking new ground. So make me a vessel, make me an offering, make me whatever you want me to be. Where there is new wine, there is new power, there is new freedom, and the kingdom is here. I lay down my old flames to carry your new fire today. So make me a vessel, make me an offering, make me whatever you want me to be. God, I came here with nothing, and all you have given me, Jesus, bring new wine out of me.
We all come to Jesus with different levels of things that we bring, and some of us can't even bring the strength to reach a hand out. Some of us don't even come with the ability to even begin to speak, to cry for help. But Jesus brings to us what we need, and he turns us into him. Jesus, as we go into this week, would your Spirit walk with us? As we anticipate leaving the valley with you, would we carry the spiritual lessons of Matthew into our lives? Would we see the new thing that you have brought to this world? A spiritual life in a world that so often tries to kill our spirit. Spiritual understanding that goes beyond anything I can work up. And a relationship. To give me back even my voice when I feel like my voice has been muted. When I feel so oppressed, I can't even speak and cry for help. You'll touch me and give me my voice back. So we go through this week seeing the amazing new thing that you have brought. Would it be especially poignant on this Holy Week as we anticipate the cost by which you brought it? As we mark you heading to your crucifixion. Amen. As always, coffee and donuts. I look forward to getting to say hi to most of you. Yeah. I just love what our community is becoming and what the Spirit of God is doing here. Have a good week.